Hey folks, this is Caleb. I'm in UN Plaza in Manhattan, and I figured I would want to give folks a lowdown on all the controversies going on right now surrounding cell phones related to China. There's a lot of stuff about Chinese cell phones, a lot of issues people bring up. There's the recent controversy around ZTE, there's stuff about Apple and iPhones, Huawei, whatever. So I just want to make a quick video on all the drama related to Chinese cell phones. All right. So the first point I want to make, which absolutely needs to be made, is this, right? So many people start walking around and say, oh my gosh, you know, if you have an iPhone or if you have a smartphone, this is proof of how great the capitalist system is, right? And you should never believe in socialism if you use an iPhone or a computer or an Apple, because these innovations, this technological brilliance is only possible with capitalism, they tell us, right? You can't possibly have anyone invent anything or do anything like that. In socialism, all of this comes from private free market investments. This is a libertarian capitalist talking point. Well, it's fraudulent, and it's a fake argument in a lot of ways for this reason, right? The iPhone requires 12 key scientific and technological breakthroughs. In fact, Tony Smith of the University of Iowa, he's a professor, he wrote an article talking about, red innovation, and he pointed out that of these 12 technological breakthroughs that are necessary to have an iPhone, we're talking about touch-sensitive screens, we're talking about the internet, we're talking, about artificial intelligence voice activation, all of these technological breakthroughs that are necessary in iPhones, all of them came from government-funded research. It was government funding of research and development that is responsible for all these technological and scientific breakthroughs that are responsible for making the iPhone, all 12 of them. And he lists 12. So it's research funded by the government that has brought us so many of the breakthroughs in computer technology. You won't hear that from the libertarian crowd. They don't acknowledge that, but that's the reality. Now, furthermore, something that needs to be said is this idea that you can't invent anything in a socialist society. No one in the socialist society ever invents anything. People just are lazy and poor and all of this. Let's just look at the facts. What was the first country to launch a satellite into outer space? It was the Soviet Union. What's the first country to put a person into outer space? The Soviet Union, and the person's name was Yuri Gagarin. The Soviet Union also invented the AK-47 rifle, the most efficient firearm, automatic weapon used all over the world. Militaries all over the world use it. It is very efficient. It's very easy to assemble. It's probably one of the most efficient weapons in the world, and it was invented by the Soviet Union. LED lights were invented in the Soviet Union. In fact, there was a huge amount of computer technology investment in the Soviet Union, despite the fact that they were constantly under military threat and constantly struggling to try and keep up with the West in terms of military technology and the arms race and protection and economic development. But regardless, the Soviet Union made huge breakthroughs in computer technology. There were even home computers that were developed in East Germany in the 1970s. But the government made a calculated decision. They said, we can't focus on computer development. We need to focus on defense. We need to focus on other things. But there were great scientific achievements by the Soviet Union. This idea that science and technology is only possible under capitalism is absurd. It's simply absurd. In fact, and going back to my earlier point, many of the great breakthroughs in technology and science are done by the funding of the government. So that's just completely off. So throw that first thing out. This idea that iPhones prove that capitalism is great, just throw that in the garbage, right? Now, a lot of people talk about the fact that iPhones are manufactured in China. Why is that, right? Why is that? And Donald Trump, during his presidential campaign, he said he was going to force iPhones, the iPhone manufacturers, Apple, to start making their iPhones in the United States. Well, Adam Minter, who's a writer for Bloomberg News, wrote a very interesting article where he basically laid out that even if Apple decided that they wanted to make their cell phones in the United States, they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. Why? Because in order to get an assembly line together with tens of thousands of people to start assembling iPhones, you have to be able to mobilize the population. You have to be able to move people really quickly. You have to be able to reorganize cities. rush people around, and that there hasn't been a mobilization on that scale in the United States since the Second World War. The amount of planning and organization of the population that they have in China, where they have a state-run economy, and they have the Communist Party with 90 million members, organized on a community level, and they have people in every building, every apartment building has party people that are getting instructions. We don't have that here. It's very chaotic. And so the idea that we're going to mobilize tens of thousands of people all to get to the same spot and all to start, working in the same place and making the product, don't count on it. The reason that Apple manufactures their iPhones in China is because the society is so efficiently organized. It's a great place to set up shop and do business. Second of all, you don't just need assembly line workers in order to make an iPhone. You also need scientists, technicians, people with degrees in engineering, people that are computer experts, electronics engineers. We don't have very many of those in the USA. We don't have enough of those. We only graduate, a few thousand, maybe 10,000, 30,000 of those people a year. Our university system at this point does not churn out the number of engineers that are necessary in order to set up iPhone manufacturing. Well, in China they do. In China they're funding a huge amount of education. They're building new universities. They're training their people in technology, science, engineering. We don't do that in the United States. It's this. We privatized it. It's all in the private sector. People go into debt for many years just to get their education. Public universities are being gutted. The educational system's a mess. We just had those big teachers' strikes across the country and places like Oklahoma and West Virginia. Education is not our priority in the U.S. It's public property. It's part of the state in many ways, and so it's disregarded. There's this idea that anything that's government funded the funding should be cut, and so we're in this crisis where we don't even have the people that are trained in the scientific way of doing things that could even pull this off. So the idea that Apple makes their iPhones in China because China's an evil dictatorship or something, you got to throw that one out too. Apple makes their iPhones in China because China's a great place to do business because it's a socialist country, because it has a state-planned economy. It has 5-year development plans, the party's in charge, and the society is organized enough that they can effectively get things done, and it's a good place to set up manufacturing. Now, at this point, manufacturing in China isn't expanding because at this point you don't have a growth in the in the manufacturing sector. You have a service sector expansion. But regardless, the wages of industrial workers in China have been drastically increasing during the last decade. They've been rising and rising and rising. So it's very interesting. A lot of people have in their heads that all of China, everyone who works in China, it's all sweatshops and people are just starving and miserable. Bad things have gone on. There have been scandals. There's been a wave of strikes. There was a wave of strikes at Honda. There was strikes at Foxconn. There are problems with that, but that's not completely accurate. And in China, you'll see something you'll never see in any capitalist country, which is when workers go out on strike demanding better conditions, you'll actually see the government supporting the strikers. That will actually happen. You'll have workers in China go on strike and the government will step in and take the side of the workers. So people that want to just make it sound like China's just one giant sweatshop and that's where we get our iPhones, they're not reflecting reality here. That's not accurate. Now, on to the ZTE controversy that's been happening, right? So we got ZTE, which is this corporation, this Chinese corporation, and let's be clear, this is a private corporation, but it's not really private, right? It was set up by the Chinese Ministry of Aerospace, and it works closely with the Chinese military. And yes, it's technically private, and it brings in a lot of foreign investment, but it doesn't function according to the market logic. It's not just doing whatever it needs to do to keep making money for the shareholders. It functions in accordance with the state central plan. And that's true for all the private corporations in China. They're not really private. They obey the government. They are controlled by the state. The Communist Party has people that oversee them and tell them what to do. The same with the Chinese stock market. A lot of private companies in the Chinese stock market, but they can't just do whatever they want. They do what the government tells them to do. They do see a return on their investment. People invest in them, make money, but they don't function according to market logic. Capitalism is defined by Frederick Engels as under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital, meaning capitalists don't care, right? They don't build buildings so people can live in them. They build buildings so they can make money, right? They don't, grow food so people can eat it. They grow food so they can make money, right? That capitalism is the anarchy of production. Well, in China, you don't have the anarchy of production. You have the Communist Party and the 5-year plans dictating economic activity. And that's what goes on. And so, yes, ZTE is technically a private company, but it doesn't do whatever it wants. And it's very closely tied in with the Chinese Ministry of Aerospace and especially with the Chinese military. So, a couple years back, ZTE was accused, and I emphasize that word, accused by the US government. The Department of Commerce was accused of doing business with Iran and North Korea, and it was alleged that not only did they do business with Iran and North Korea in violation of US sanctions on these countries, but it's alleged that they gave some of their executives a bonus for doing that. And so the US Department of Commerce, imposed about $19 billion in fines onto ZTE, and their operation in the United States was essentially shut down. They couldn't operate. Well, when that happened, and let's keep in mind, there's no trial that goes on. The Department of Commerce, they don't get to come forward and show evidence that they didn't do it. They don't get to see what the evidence against them is. There's no trial. They're just the Department of Commerce declares that this foreign country, this foreign company did something bad, and then all of a sudden they're shut down. Regardless, okay, so ZTE is basically shut down, fined $19 billion in the United States. Well, Donald Trump tweets out recently that he's going to lift the sanctions and the penalties against ZTE in response and as a result of the negotiations he's been doing with President Xi. So he's going to lift the penalties on ZTE. So there's huge amounts of outrage, not just among the Democrats and the opposition, but also among Republicans. And they're trying to overrule Donald Trump right now. They basically do not approve of him lifting this sanction on ZTE, this Chinese corporation. So we're basically seeing Donald Trump, who has this reputation for being crazy and a warmonger. He did a deal where he basically made things better for a Chinese corporation in exchange for them agreeing to import more U.S. products, and agricultural products. It's part of the ongoing negotiation there. And now we're seeing Congress and the political establishment essentially try to overrule Trump. They're outraged that he took the heat off this Chinese company. That's completely crazy. So, when it comes to iPhones and cell phones, people have a lot of misconceptions about China and cell phones and all kinds of things. I've tried to refute some of those misconceptions. But I think the main thing here is that, that human creativity and innovation is not tied in with capitalism, right? Capitalists don't want to lose money. They prefer not to take risks. They want a secure investment. And that's why Hollywood makes the same movie over and over and over again. They're not going to take the risk of doing something bold and new and exciting. They just want something they're guaranteed to get their money back on. But throughout human history, governments, states have supported innovation. The Renaissance era, you had people like Leonardo da Vinci, you had Kepler, Copernicus, and it was the government kind of finding the skilled people among the population and putting them to work. That was the basis of a lot of the innovation we've seen. This idea that people who invent things and people who create things, they only do it because they want to make money, that's a libertarian free market myth. Now, I'm sure it happens, especially in earlier times of capitalism when things were a lot less centralized, when there was a lot more smaller businesses, you had a level of that, and you still have a level of that. However, this idea that you need profits and markets in order to have human creativity is false. In fact, the problem with capitalism is that as you advance technology under capitalism, as you make production more efficient, in the process you create greater poverty. In times past, people were hungry because there was not enough food. Today, under capitalism, people are hungry because there is too much food. The more efficient they make the process of growing food, the fewer people that are hired, the lower the wages of those who are hired is, and there's less food. In times past, people were homeless because there was not enough housing. Well, under capitalism, people are homeless because there is too much housing. Capitalism is an irrational system. And socialism, in which you have central planning and the major means of production are controlled by society, is a way of forcing the economy to function in a rational way for the benefit of the population. And that's the difference between the two systems. People say socialism is the government giving people free stuff. People say that, socialism is progressive taxation. These are misnomers. The difference between capitalism and socialism is that socialism is a planned economy, and capitalism is the anarchy of production. It's every corporation, business just trying to make money, doing whatever tries to make them rich enough. I know John Maynard Keynes, who was not an advocate of socialism, he himself said, that capitalism, I believe the way he put it is he said, only a madman or an economist would think that the most despicable men for the most despicable reasons would somehow work for the benefit of all. This idea that greed is good and that, the Ayn Rand talks about the virtue of selfishness. This stuff is insane. And it's largely what's responsible for the fact that here in the USA our roads are crumbling. Here in the USA our water is not being properly purified. This libertarian free market ideology, this idea that the government should do nothing, we should privatize everything, privatize our schools, privatize our prisons, privatize our police, everything should be a for-profit interest. This is wrecking our country. And if you truly love America, if you're truly patriotic, you should say, look, it's time that the government start building roads here in the United States. It's time that they start funding research and technology. It's time they start providing education. This idea that we should just let the market take care of itself and let the society ruin, survival of the fittest, that's leading to so many problems in our country right now, and we really need to change it. So that's what I've got to say to you today. I hope you learned something about China and cell phones.